Nani? What's that? It's America's most radioactive podcast, The Pod People. I'm Shin Podzilla.
I'm Ben Sheets, and Shin Godzilla, get in the mech.
Don't you mean Shinji Godzilla?
Yeah.
Hey, what's up, y'all? It's Cleveland Fukushima Mosher. How's it going?
Well, we're very excited. We're very excited to welcome a first-time special guest to the podcast. Friend of the pod, Spence, is here. Spence, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Hey, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
We're talking this week about Cleveland's pick, which is Shin Godzilla, the 2016 Toho-produced live-action Godzilla spectacular, co-directed by Hideaki Anno and Shinji Higuchi. In order to sort of ease us into this, Cleveland has kind of heralded Spence on the show as somewhat of an expert in Japanese cinema. So, Spence, would you like to intro Shin Godzilla for us?
Yeah.
Not to put you on the spot.
No, but I mean, I don't know what else to say about it besides that it was honestly a return to form for Godzilla, and a time that was very much needed. It's a typical, almost kind of like reboot.
Well, yeah, because before this, we had the 2000s Godzilla, the Americanized one, which was pretty shit.
There's the Roland Emmerich one in like 2001, and then there was the first of the legendary Godzilla MonsterVerse films in 2013. That one was directed by Gareth Edwards. This is a Toho produced film, so the originators of Godzilla. This is their first full reboot of the franchise. I was reading that they had rebooted it a few times before, but always as a direct sequel to the original 1954, I want to say, and where at least the world of man had been exposed to Godzilla before. But this is the first time going back to the very beginning where Godzilla is an entirely new discovery and kind of in a new direction.
And Godzilla isn't like fighting another big kaiju, it's just about Godzilla.
Yeah, that was another thing I was going to say. This was the first live-action Japanese Godzilla film where he was not fighting another monster since Godzilla 1985. So
yeah.
good long time. Yeah, this is kind of a traditional return to form for the franchise, with it really being more about the sort of governmental reaction to this big radioactive lizard rising up out of the ocean and stomping around Tokyo. What do we do? How do we stop this? How do we prevent as much loss of life as possible? And how do we do it before America drops another nuke on Japan?
Yeah.
Right. Spence, when we were watching it yesterday, you'd mentioned that like Toho was sort of like on the they're suffering.
Yeah. So to give you a look into Toho, as a company, they do a lot of production and distribution of movies domestically in Japan, as well as a few animes. But when it comes to the Godzilla series, before this movie was the internationally the Roland Emmerich Godzilla, famously a bomb in the box offices, and domestically the last film they made was Godzilla Final Wars, which I personally have a soft spot for as a movie, but realistically did absolute trash. Memory serves me right, they didn't even make back 3/4 of their budget.
Oof.
After
Jesus.
releasing to a global market. So Toho and Godzilla was in a really bad spot, and there were multiple projects to revive Godzilla after Final Wars that had been scrapped and canceled. And the project that actually went forward was what became the Gareth Edwards 2013 Godzilla reboot. And that had been seen as almost like a last-ditch effort for Godzilla. Had that movie not done well, Toho would have not probably interacted with the IP at all, outside of, maybe some figurines and stuff.
Well, I'm glad they did because it feels like this one is sort of a clean slate, especially compared to the 2013 one. It's so different than that one. And
Yeah.
I really like the opportunity to start from a clean slate because man oh man, do they just make Godzilla a little freak in this movie. He's introduced coming out of the water and he's like bleeding all over the streets.
Well,
Yeah, he's like in a sort of like devolved form. Like
Yeah.
Godzilla goes through like multiple rapid evolutions in this film, and so yeah, when you first like see him come up onto land, he's like doesn't really have like four legs. He's got like these big dumb like fish eyes, this little googly eyed fucking freak. Flopping around the city, like trying to climb up a building and just like pushing it over, spilling blood and goo from his big fleshy gills.
see, I love this because
I do
you
too.
kind of get to have your cake
Mhm.
and eat it too. Where even though this movie exclusively features one creature, Godzilla, Godzilla goes through multiple forms and phases, so you still get a lot of monster variety between them. I
Yeah.
think the baby one is the best example. It's pretty far shot from the original classic Godzilla coming up out of the ocean. It's messy. It's crawling around. It's strange. And new. I frankly love its design. I find that it is a really nice middle ground between cute, almost funny, but kind of terrifying. I actually think its design is pretty spooky, um, but also funny. It's kind of like nervous laughter when I see it. Like it's got a
It's
nubby
really
arms flailing around is funny, and its big
it's really the
eyes.
big googly eyes for me that
Yeah.
like makes it funny. I agree with you otherwise. Like I do think the design is creepy. Like the big like fleshy gills are gross, and like the way it just kind of like flops around on land like sort of like a fish, like it's got back legs but it doesn't have four legs. Like it is like kind of creepy and uncanny, but it does have those big googly eyes that I
Eyes
just
to me are the most
cannot take seriously.
I found them to be like really uncanny because they look like big doll fake eyes, but the way that like fish eyes look
Yes, they're fish eyes.
Mhm.
And-
They're big, glassy, lifeless fish eyes.
lifeless and yeah, and like unthinking and uncaring. And when that's like filling the horizon and just like destroying everything in its path, like it feels like a part of nature, right? Like it feels like this like it's just a fish that just happened to find its way on shore. It's this weird baby that's just roving around destroying everything and not and just it's a force of nature. It's a cyclone. And that kind of reminds me of like the end of Akira too, where he's like a big melty baby mutant like destroying everything. It's that I don't know, there's some interesting tie-ins there, I think. Also, it sort of looks like a middle ground between a toad and a tadpole. Its arms haven't fully formed.
Yeah.
It's like that. What do you think, Spence, about the
Well,
design?
Cleveland, I sent you pictures from the concept art book.
Oh yeah.
And I don't know if you remember seeing them. There's actually and Thies and Ben, I don't know if you guys have seen it. There was actually 6 planned forms for Godzilla in this film, and one of the forms that was cut was a first form that looks exactly like a tadpole, and basically what it looks like is just a lungfish with like a really messed up like face and then like a super long tail. And
Oh, whoa.
this is actually a first in Godzilla because in most Godzilla films, Godzilla is either like a prehistoric creature or just a creature that's created. But that rapid evolution kind of brings into sight that this is, a creature that had existed in the water, had mutated due to radioactive dumping, and needed to change forms because it ran out of a food source in the water. And I think that that's kind of a understated point when we see Kamada-kun, which is the fan name for the baby form. When he comes
Oh,
onto the
yes.
ground,
Good name.
he looks like he's in pain.
Mm-hmm.
And he's only really taking to the land because he needs radiation. There's no more in the water. And it's this creature kind of not made for land trying to force itself to a new environment.
It's really cool.
Yeah,
It
it's
reflects
cool.
like the dawn of evolution with fish first coming up on land, and growing legs. I really like that. That's rad.
Yeah, I think what's really great about this iteration of Godzilla is that it really feels like Godzilla at its most distilled as like a unstoppable force of nature that is destroying us because of our own like actions. Like the original Godzilla obviously was, a response to the horrors of like nuclear war. The collective trauma of Japan from the dropping of the bombs in World War II, and as sort of a cautionary tale for man's hubris getting out of its control and returning as sort of this unstoppable force. And I think that a lot of the subsequent Godzilla movies, for better and worse, have sort of lost that theme, and this is returning to it, not just about like the dropping of the bombs, but also as a response to like the Fukushima nuclear meltdown disaster. I know both the directors were very open about that being sort of the template for the way the human characters behave in this movie, as sort of like an indictment of how badly Japan's government responded to the Fukushima disaster and some of the decisions they made, and sort of mirroring those types of things in the response to this big radioactive lizard that, as we've mentioned, has evolved from a simpler life form from feeding on radioactive waste that has been dumped into the ocean. So again, like man's hubris creating something that they cannot control.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, the early scenes with the cabinet and the government is actually almost 1-to-1 to how the Japanese government handled the initial response to Fukushima. And I think that is the most interesting part that kind of speaks to me, is this film, to go into a little bit of history on Anno. I don't know if you guys know, he actually is a very huge fan of tokusatsu, all major forms of it, Ultraman, Kamen Rider. And whenever he first was breaking into the entertainment industry, he actually submitted projects to both Toho and Sabuya originally before he even started writing Evangelion. And both of them were declined, which actually ends up really, I think, painting a lot of the weird depression and kind of, downiness of Evangelion, because he was in a really bad spot where he felt like, his heroes had abandoned him, because ever since a child he had wanted to work in this industry with these heroes and basically had every door closed for him. So whenever Toho came to him, as a possible director, this painted someone who really understood Godzilla's origins. And after seeing this, and they had announced that he was going to do an Ultraman, kind of put me like, oh no, Anno's gonna make one of the best Ultraman movies ever. Like, this guy gets tokusatsu.
And I know that he's just one of two directors on this, that Shinji Higuchi is also credited as a director, who I was looking at some of his stuff, and he seems to have worked pretty closely with Anno throughout most of his career, it looks like. Definitely involved in some Evangelion stuff. He directed the 2 Attack on Titan movies, which I haven't seen. I'm not enough of a weeb for that. And not good.
I mean, they're okay.
Well, and
A lot of the
he
feeling of
also
that.
went on to actually direct Shin Ultraman, with Anno writing,
And editing.
and I think they're working together on, or they did work together on Shin Kamen Rider, which comes out this year. Is that out already?
Yes, that has been out for a few months. It's actually getting
Yeah.
its first showing in America on May 31st. That's a
Ooh, okay.
Fathom event.
Oh wow.
You gonna see it in theaters?
It'll be right after this comes out.
Oh yeah, I bought my ticket day one, dude. I'm in.
Hell yeah.
The clips I've seen look fantastic. But yeah, anyway, that's all just going to say that, like, Toho obviously put this film in very good hands, and it shows. I like this movie a lot. I don't think it's entirely devoid of problems, but I think that it is a really interesting and exciting movie too, for how much of it is really just like about the government response and not, directly fighting Godzilla.
Well, I'd like
Although
to see
there is plenty of that.
For sure. That's my favorite nod to the original film, which I watched for the first time only a couple weeks ago. And, like, with these classic monster films, they keep their cards relatively close to their chest because, like, it's a guy in a rubber suit destroying a cardboard city. Like, there's only so much they can do with, like, masking.
Oh, but not this one.
In the scenes. But, so a lot of the film is the build-up around it. It's the scientists in the rooms figuring out how they're going to handle this event. It's the news reporters. It's the soldiers on the ground. It's all the people responding to it. But there are primary protagonists. There are, like, important people involved that sort of span across all of these events that we root for or boo at. But overall, the primary character of these movies is the nation of Japan, right? This movie carries on that legacy beautifully. We're constantly flitting from news anchors to, broadcasting rooms to the government halls and the science teams, and we're seeing all of it play out. Now, in this case, or, poorly often, but I love but not exclusively. Like, what I really like about it is there are still, like, characters that you're rooting for, like the sort of the protagonist character. I forget his name.
Higuchi.
Higuchi, yeah. Like, we're rooting for Higuchi, right? Like, he realizes, like, what it could be very early on. He's posing, like, more obscure hypotheses that end up being true. It's a big lizard in the ocean, but and we care about his character. He clearly, like, wants people to be safe and means for the best. And I like that. I like that it's not exclusively dour, and we're not just sitting around, like, frowning over the government response exclusively. You can tell there are still good people at hand, and they're trying to work through this terrible system. They're trying to work through the bureaucracy and just cut to what needs to be done. And I really like that. Like, there's a lot of friction there, and it's tense. It's quickly paced. We're going from scene to scene really fast as people are just trying to figure out what's happening. And there's pretty long stints where there's no Godzilla at all. I think, like, the first time he kind of stops, we don't cut back to him for 10 minutes. And when we do, it's just to see his tail twitch, and then we don't cut back to him for another 10 minutes. Like, there's pretty much minus that one shot, about 20-minute sequence where it's just the people trying to figure out what to do next, and it's compelling as hell. It's really it really keeps. I was engaged the whole movie.
Yeah, well, because I mean, like, Godzilla's not really a character, right? He's a force, in like a disaster movie, you don't focus the camera on the hurricane blowing outside the window the whole time. You're inside, you're inside with the people, like, trying to figure out how do we escape the hurricane, right?
Say that, but we've all seen Kong versus Godzilla, right? Like the hurricane is a character in that movie, and frankly, wolves too.
False equivalency. Totally different movie.
That's fair.
Totally different goals. Totally different like depiction of Godzilla. Like the legendary MonsterVerse Godzilla is not the same Godzilla that is in this movie. They're very, very different.
And while we're on that topic, I do also want to note that, while the prior films had sort of forgotten like what Godzilla was and what he represented, also I think they went the opposite route and were a little bit too heavy-handed with it. I like to think about that one scene in King of the Monsters where the guy like gives him the pocket watch that's from that stopped from Hiroshima, and it's like, well, yeah, it's important to have that, but it did like it's almost like it's too direct.
Yeah, man, I don't like those movies. Like I liked Kong Kong versus Godzilla well enough, but like the legendary Godzilla movies, like the Gareth Edwards one and King of the Monsters, like I don't really like those movies very much.
Yeah,
I love a lot of sequences in them. Like I think there's some really cool moments, and overall I know y'all disagree, but I do like some of the character stuff in them as well.
Oddly enough, I find those movies kind of boring.
I do too.
Even though like they're a little more paced than this one, even.
Well, they're more.
I think this one has
heavy.
Yeah, I think that's a better way of putting it. This one, it has such a ticking clock to all of the trying to problem solve that it doesn't feel overly long.
No.
I do think it drags slightly in the middle.
Yeah.
But not to a point where it negates much of the movie. And like I said, it's a much more compelling movie.
Yeah. Well, while we're on this comparison point, I think the big difference for me is that this movie feels like it has stakes in a way that the legendary Godzilla movies just like don't. I don't know, like I mean I know it's a whole like, oh, we gotta save the world and keep the cities safe from Godzilla or whatever monsters or King Ghidorah or whatever. But it's like, I don't know, there's something about the way those movies present them, like it feels so intangible. Like I don't feel like it's like, okay, CG monsters smashing CG buildings, and we're not seeing like the people on the ground, in the same way. Or it's like this movie, the stakes feel like very, very real. Like we really like see the like devastation that Godzilla inflicts on Tokyo just fucking walking through the city, And then of course there's like probably my favorite scene later where they're trying to drop the bombs on him and he does the fucking like laser breath for the first time, which is fucking awesome. But it's like, it feels like a fucking nuke went off, And I don't know, I just don't feel that same like sense of devastation in the legendary ones, even if there is more actual like smashing of buildings. I don't know.
Well, Spence, you're kind of more in my camp on this one. You're a fan. You're a big fan of like King of the Monsters and the 2013 one. And,
well, I was gonna say, that meme of the girl saying like no to the guy, and she's like spitting out a torrent of knives that are like going through the dude.
Yeah,
that's how I feel right now. Just absolutely just getting serrated and blasted. But I'm
sorry.
No. That's a joke. Again, the interesting thing about Godzilla, and I always bring this up with anyone I talk to, is that Godzilla is across so many mediums and just films as different things, to the point that as a Godzilla fan, I've grown to enjoy films for what they try to do and kind of, like, don't really compare apples to oranges, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So the whole deal with the legendary Godzillas is, they're more, like you said, action focused. They are very much trying to elicit the same ideas as the Heisei Godzillas, where, every film that was coming out was Godzilla X Biolante. Kind of the whole Final Wars situation where, Final Wars has 22 kaiju in it.
Jesus.
And, we're just being shown, like, okay, here's Kumongo over France just destroying stuff, and then, we're going to go to Gigan over Japan. And that's a really different feel compared to Shin Godzilla, which, is this super tight, contained character piece. And then, we can go in the complete opposite direction and talk about the Netflix anime movies.
Oh, yeah.
Which are these, like, super hard sci-fi weirdo stuffs.
That series takes place, like, thousands of years in the future, and man is, like, only just now coming back to Earth because Godzilla won. Yeah, that series is wild if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, and like, I think that you're 100% correct, Spence, and that is a totally fair argument. And what I will append onto my spraying of knives about the Legendary movies is that it really, you're right. There are so many different, like, flavors of Godzilla media that it ultimately comes down to what you prefer and what kind of Godzilla you like. And to be totally honest, I have not seen that many Godzilla movies, all things considered. I've seen all the Legendary ones. I've seen Shin Godzilla, obviously. When I was a kid, I saw Godzilla 2000 in theaters. Like, I've seen, like, maybe one or two others in there somewhere. So, like, I say all of that as, like, somebody who does not have the strongest grasp of the Godzilla canon, I guess. I just know what I like and what I don't like, and I really like Shin Godzilla, and that's the kind of that's what I want for this type of movie more so than the Legendary ones. That being said, I do not by any means dislike a kaiju fighting movie. I love Pacific Rim. Especially the first one. The second one's okay, but
I will say, I think at its core, Godzilla is a very Japanese story. So I think some of the shortcomings that I see in the Legendary movie, as well as the 2001, come from kind of some of that being lost in translation, almost trying to be Americanized.
Yeah, to a degree. My thought is, like, going with that idea of, like, there's so many variants of it, is I love a big lizard, and I'm here to taste all the different big lizard flavors that they're bringing to the table, Like, and
you're like Jeff Bezos at the table, smiling over the iguana.
Yo, I'm rubbing my hands together. I'm excited.
You know what? I will say too, like, the monster fight stuff in all the Legendary movies is pretty fun. I think really a bigger issue I have with them is that I don't really like any of the human characters. Like, I remember going to see the Gareth Edwards one in 2013 in theaters, being, like, super hyped because we were still in those days. Like, I think the final season of Breaking Bad had, like, just aired. Bryan Cranston was still hot, and I went to that. It's like, yes, Bryan Cranston in a Godzilla movie. This is great. And I remember sitting there just being shocked at how they made Bryan Cranston just, like, a totally wooden, uninteresting nerd.
Well, he dies in the first one.
And in 14 minutes.
Also that. Right, yeah.
Like, the first 14 minutes and he's just dead, gone.
Yeah, sucks. And it's like,
that was bad marketing. Like, they did
I don't care about Aaron Taylor Johnson. Come on, man. Like, what do you want me to do with these characters?
I will say, for me, it was made up for the fact by, like, some of the shots. I think that movie has incredible cinematography. Like, when they shoot over the side of it and them, like, flying down over it. Like, I love those sequences.
The coolest thing that movie did was that first trailer that they released of, like, the Marines, like, jumping out of the plane, doing, like, the Halo jump, coming down into the burning city, and just, like, falling into the smoke, and then just falling past this, like, massive form. Like, that was fucking cool, and I don't think the movie lived up to that, and how cool that fucking scene was. Anyway, we should be talking about Shin Godzilla.
Oh,
We're
but
talking
before
about-
we do, when it comes to variants, there's one other one I just wanted to touch on real quick that we forgot about, and that was the Fox animated cartoon.
Yes,
series
dude!
based
I
on
was
the
gonna-
Roland Emmerich one. That was the first one I grew up with.
Me too! I was gonna ask if anybody else watched that. Yeah, dude.
I watched the shit out of that when I was a kid. Probably not aged well, but I do like the Roland
not.
Emmerich cartoon design Godzilla, where he's like really sharp, with a big he has like that Bruce Wayne jaw that's like really massive. I like that design of Godzilla too.
That's that Godzilla is canonically female as well.
Wow.
Lady Godzilla. They trans Godzilla all the way back in 2001.
Wow. Woke Hollywood.
The
What do you
woke
do next?
the woke mind virus has been time traveling.
Yeah, more like Wokeland Emmerich. Get the fuck out of here.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, now we can get back to talking about Shin Godzilla.
Well,
Sorry, to interrupt, there's actually a really funny thing going on where the Godzilla store every few years does a popularity contest to decide a new figure, and currently they're in their final stages, and the 98 Zilla is in the top 4 for a figure this year.
Oh shit!
Yeah, it's a really weird thing where, like, even though, everyone kind of hates the movie, that design,
This one's
everyone
good.
kind of agrees. It's
I
a
almost
decent
feel like
design.
that movie's kind of getting a reappraisal in the last few years. I don't think
No.
it deserves it, but
I haven't seen it in a very long time. It'd be kind of fun to
movie
watch.
fucking sucks.
I think it's just a design, Ben. I'm gonna think everybody in their right mind will tell you that that's a
I
lot of
hope
pitch.
so.
The movie is
honestly.
trash.
Yeah. It's just such a big
Yeah.
resurgence. Netflix is partly responsible. They keep taking all these like flop movies from the 2000s and 90s and like putting them up and being like, "Wow, people really love this now because we put it at the top of our algorithm."
Yeah, nostalgia bullshit. Also, like, Roland Emmerich's a fucking hack, man.
Correct.
He got lucky with Independence Day. Independence Day is not even as good as it's remembered. I
like
think.
Independence Day as a cartoon, but man, I've seen Moonfall. Like,
It's fine. Yeah, I remember seeing the Independence Day sequel that came out a few years
Oh
ago.
God.
oh yeah, skip that one.
Ooh, that shit was doo doo. Anyway, all right. Finally, course correcting
There we
for
go.
real this time. Shin Godzilla.
Well, to circle back, one thing I really like in this movie is how they show Godzilla, because they have a lot of wide shots of Godzilla, and you see him very clearly, but you also get these closer shots of him kind of just wreaking havoc on streets, as he crawls through and fumbles about, and you really see kind of the devastating effects of him being nearby.
Just boats being like thrown onto the streets when he's first.
Yeah, I love that. One of the first sequences we get when he's coming onto land is a bunch of fucking boats just being thrown through a street.
Before we even see it, it's just this wall of boats and debris being just pushed up and over onto buildings with some sort of scaled entity like through the smoke behind it, and it's great. Like, I love the setup. They slowly reveal the creature, and then you get it in full, and they really revel in it. And like the first shot with just the plume in the distance is really good. And one of my favorite moments is early on when we get that shot of the tunnel, and just the blood just comes in and just destroys a car
Through the ceiling, yeah. That whole part, that setup reminds me a lot of Cloverfield.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like all the people like hiding in the tunnel, this sort of taken from like cell phone videos and stuff, and like we haven't really seen the monster. We know there's something out there. I like that stuff, and I feel like even though they don't really like utilize like videos from people's phones or whatever throughout the rest of the film, they do still use a lot of the same kind of like camera style. I think there's a lot of like Godzilla from the ground, like from obviously like moving cars and stuff. And I think it really helps with the scale, you know.
Yeah.
Unintended.
There's a oh yeah, there you go. That's another kind of problem that I have with the like legendary Godzilla is like I feel like the camera is on the monster's eye level a little bit too often, you know what I mean? And it's like I think if you really want to like portray scale of like a big monster, you got to shoot it low, right? You got to shoot it from the ground.
Yeah, in King of the Monsters and in Godzilla vs Kong, like, you know, their characters and they're portrayed almost as boxers, you know, like at like head
Right.
level. I do love that. But I do think
Godzilla vs Kong is fun.
fairness,
I'm on
Yeah.
record with enjoying that movie.
yeah. Like 2013 I think does like do a lot of like pretty low level shots and has a lot of boots on the ground stuff where you're seeing them, you know, through the smoke. But yeah, no. Overall, though, I love how they do it in this film.
And I do think it's a key indication of, you know, Anno trying to emulate that style because, you know, a lot of the shots of Godzilla in this film feel almost one-to-one with how they shot the original suit in 54. And, you know, in 54, it was done that way because, you know, they had the limitations. They didn't want you to see, you know, the obvious suit. Where here, you know, even though the majority of the shots are also CG, you know, they're still trying to emulate that feeling of tokusatsu shooting, which I think is very key for a lot of tokusatsu films. And it's kind of like a make and break for them.
Yeah, there are a few. I did catch a few like miniatures in this movie, which was fun. They're used very sparingly. But you mentioned the CG, Spence, and that is something that I wanted to talk about. How do y'all feel about like the CG and like the digital effects in this movie? Because I'm kind of two minds about it. I feel like sometimes it looks really great, and then other times it feels kind of cheap. I don't know. How do y'all feel about it?
I think to me the moment that stands out as the most CG is when the helicopters first come in. For the most part, the masking and the mats and the damage, and Godzilla itself as a baby and all the rest, like it looks so good. You really can't. For me, it was kind of difficult to tell, like if it was puppetry or if it was like a guy in a suit or if it was CG. Like when he's
it's all CG.
But you know, he's a big lizard and he's very alien looking, so it translates very well, I thought. But when the other objects, like the helicopters, come in after him, in the first sequence where they're like, "Oh, do we shoot? There's still civilians in the area," and they end up calling it off. They're pretty noticeably CG, like flying through the air. But I personally, I didn't really mind it because it's so well edited and shot that like the intensity is so strong, and I was already so excited for helicopters to come in and fight Godzilla that I didn't mind at all. Like I was on board. I was like, oh yeah, we're gonna get some helicopter fights, you know, like it's gonna be great.
Yeah, and I think, you know, post Evangelion, you know, having Anno at the helm really helps with a lot of the CG, both in kind of helping coordinate animation teams as well as kind of having an eye for composition and, you know, what helps with scale. Because there's so many sequences in Evangelion where it's, you know, trying to emphasize the scale and size of things. And I think that works to an advantage here, especially with the CG, because we get so many details that I don't know if we would get otherwise. Like the fleshiness of Godzilla himself in this movie is so tactile.
I have to wonder because I don't know if you guys know, but they actually, when they originally were filming the scenes for Godzilla, actually wanted to go full practical. And there's actually behind the scenes footage of them with a multi-person operated puppet of Godzilla. And what happened was when they were attempting to try and film these scenes, it was just deemed too difficult on the operators to get the shots that Higuchi and Anno wanted. So, for the scenes that do have like kind of noticeably CG parts, I wonder if those, had to be kind of done last minute-ish.
Well, that's almost like the double-edged sword of being an expert in, animation, right? Like having so much experience with Evangelion, like you have so much control doing an animated show or movie where you don't get quite as much control when it's humans in a suit, and it makes things a little trickier.
An
Yeah.
Eva like walking around versus a person walking around like technically is about as the equivalent.
Yeah, I really think, Ben, a couple of minutes ago you mentioned the composition, and I think that is like the ultimate saving grace for me, because I don't know if it's just because like being spoiled with the standard of like big budget American like production CG, but it's like there are, I think, a number of times in this movie where like the CG modeling of Godzilla stands out quite a bit and sort of looks like a video game character almost, but the compositions of the shots are so interesting and exciting and dynamic and so different from, to go back to the easy punching bag of like Marvel movies where it's just like actors on a green screen, total CG slop, but all like framed so statically and boring with like uninteresting composition that just makes it look like one big gray slurry of like digital effects. This movie, like, even though the quality of the CG might not be quite up to the level of like the legendary ones, for example, like the shot composition itself and the framing and the editing and everything is so top notch that it sort of almost erases those problems, I think.
And two, sometimes, personally, I like to see the strings a little. Like, that's the fun of movie making and getting to enjoy them. When I was a kid, I still remember, like, watching, like, Star Wars movies, for the first time, being like, oh, that's a puppet. And, like, and getting excited about it. And, like, getting excited about, like, how, like, it's made by a person. And knowing, and getting to, like, both engage in the fantasy and also in the making. And I, like, especially just, and as I get older and, I kind of return to that feeling, I appreciate it all the more. Like in some of the projects we're working on now, where they're video games, they're all like CG rendered, but we're taking steps to make them feel like people in rubber suits and puppetry for that same reason. Like, it's people sometimes like seeing the strings, and I think this is a great example of it.
Yeah, I like seeing the strings usually when it's practical. I think that's a little more charming than, sort of low quality CG. Not that this movie is really that. It's never that bad.
No.
But something I read today that I thought was interesting is that, like, though Godzilla is entirely CG in this, it is mocapped. Like, they did have a guy like doing the motions, which I actually found really surprising, because I feel like Godzilla's movement in this is like so stiff and rigid, well, especially in like his final form that we see him in the film. A little less so with I forget what's the second one, the second form's called? Kamada-kun, yeah. Like, yeah, the like Godzilla's final form or whatever is like very stiff and rigid and sort of plodding. And when watching it, I was almost like, I wonder if they're not having him like move very much because it's like too difficult to animate, and so they just had like this really detailed model that they were just kind of. But no, they had a dude doing mocap, so.
See, that's interesting. It read like that for me. When he's in Kamada-kun form and he's roving around the city, he's
much more dynamic.
He's dynamic. He's bouncing around, and they show that
he's using the streets of Tokyo as a slip and slide.
It's a slip and slide, yeah. Very slippery too, with all of the blood that's pouring out of his gills.
Yeah.
But when and it just become upright, and it returns later on. It's got this black hardened shell around it. Like, it's not really scales so much as it's these like big rocky black granite gravelly cracked carapace, and it looks hardened and powerful and weighty and stiff and also pained. Like, clearly, like, from every form of Godzilla in this film looks painful. Like, it is having a bad time. Its growth, its evolution, and its interactions with the city are hurting it. Like, just walking around looks painful to it in the way that, like, me getting out of bed when, like, I've thrown my back out. Like, I walk kind of stiffly and weighty like that. And that's how I read it. Like, I read it as, like it's in great pain.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's true. I was more just saying that as I'm surprised that they had a dude mocap, mocapping it, because it doesn't, because of the stiffness. Like, it feels like they didn't have the time or the budget or the ability to, like, edit it to be, you know, more mobile. So to, like, learn that there was, like, a dude who's just, like, stiffly walking around, I just thought that was interesting. Like, I agree. I mean, you know, this movie does try to take a relatively more scientific approach. You know, that's a big part of the problem solving. Like, how do we stop Godzilla? Well, we have to understand it. It's like the most advanced life form on the planet with just, like, an insane amount of genetic material, blah blah blah, all this shit. So, you know, if you're thinking about it scientifically, like the film wants you to, it's like, yeah, something of that size and mass, like, realistically, physically would not really be able to move. And it would just be in constant agony. Like, that's why there are no animals that large on planet Earth. Because it's, like, it is not, like, physically possible, you know?
Yeah.
And the reason why things were so big, like, in the time of the dinosaurs is because there was, like, way more oxygen in the air. So it could, like, support it. But I agree with you, Cleva. Like, I like the sort of interpretation of, like, yeah, it's an organism that is larger than should be physically possible, so it's not, like, spry and nimble and, like, leaping around. So it's fine. Anyway, Spence, go ahead. Sorry.
I don't know. I was gonna just say, I always equated that to be more of the horror aspect of this film. Where, you know, when we finally get the third and fourth forms, the fourth form specifically, when he's come back out of the water, it feels very alien. And, you know, a lot of things that poise that uncanny valley of, like, you know, it should feel like it's moving around dynamically, but it's got this static position where its arms are curled up. And in the scenes where we do see him, like, you know, react to when the Mob 2s are dropped onto him, the only thing that moves is his eye. You know, his eye, which was, like, ground level, moves to the sky. But, like, his whole face, his jaw never, like, moves in that scene. And, you know, it just feels, like, robotic.
Yeah, it's uncanny. That's the right word for it.
Yeah, I love when they drop the bunker busters on him. Like,
that's the fucking coolest scene, honestly.
Yeah,
like, that is like some like real movie mindset shit right there.
So it escalates perfectly too, because, like, earlier on they bring in the helicopters, they fire at it. It eventually just turns around and goes back into the water. But when it returns, they're like, oh yeah, like, helicopters aren't gonna fucking do it. And they call in, like, U.S. stealth bombers, I think. Is that the point? Or am I getting ahead of myself?
Yep, nope, you're right.
They call in the U.S. stealth bombers, and they drop, like, specifically bunker busters. So, like, for those who don't understand, like, that's a missile that is specifically designed to, like, break through feet and feet and feet of concrete and reinforced, like, tank material, and then explode inside of it. And we see that happen to Godzilla's skin. Like, the missiles come down, and they hit it, and they burst through it, and they explode inside of Godzilla, and it looks extremely painful and bloody. Like, blood erupts from its back. It's tremendous. And
the first time anybody has been able to successfully draw blood on Godzilla thus far.
Yeah, and if it's
completely shrugged off, it is completely shrugged off all other weapons.
Yeah, and again, you really see how bad of a time Godzilla is having. And it bends over and like faces the ground, and like for a moment everyone is cheering, and then its back starts to glow purple. And I love it because in the past, like even like the 2000s or whatever, like Godzilla has always been sort of associated with either black and white or like kind of green colors and um like cyans and blues. And I don't know, like there's something about like the black skin with the purple glow that just feels like so much more like demonic and dark and
The purple glow is great. Feels very Evangelion to me.
Yeah.
that shit when it's like firing its lasers, and we're just seeing them like cut through all of the buildings and stuff. Like that shit is so fucking anime. It's great.
And it's so fucking cool. So like and I love it doesn't start with a laser. Like it bends over and its back glows and it just erupts with this smoke that billows out, and we get this wonderful shot where it cuts back really far and we see that the smoke is just pouring out through all of the city streets. Like it's like the entire city has just been like covered in this like wind blast, and the smoke grows and grows, and then it becomes fire, and as fire starts pouring out of its mouth, and then finally the fire like concentrates into like a singular spot, and then it becomes a laser beam. It's so powerful and nuclear, and then it whips its head up, and the laser beam like ignites the sky, and it's fucking incredible, and I love it.
It's literally like turning on like a gas stove, right? Where it's like at the low levels, it's like the orange flame, and as you turn it up higher, it gets more concentrated and blue and like tight. The flames are smaller and tighter. It's just like he's charging up his fucking nuclear laser of devastation.
Yeah, and then like he sweeps it across the city, and we see it like hit these. And technically, like, the CG I did find to be pretty impressive in those shots, where like you see the laser like not just cut through the buildings, but like cut through, and there's like orange fire inside the buildings as they like are burst into flames and explode, and it just rips through the city. And it's just like in one shot, like it cuts through like 6 or so buildings, and they all are very tightly and technically like rendered, and it looks amazing. And
it does the kind of traditional anime thing where like a laser cuts through something, and then there's like a beat, and a half second later it explodes.
Oh yeah, and it's so fun. And what it really reminded me of course, is as Dark Souls fans, is Dark Eater Midir, right? And
yeah.
like my favorite boss design, probably least favorite mechanical boss to fight, but
too hard.
Too hard, even for an boss.
I'm saying it. I'm saying it here. I'm gonna be the one who bravely comes out and says that Dark Eater Midir is too hard.
Too hard.
Yeah, I beat him, but I had to summon 3 people to help me.
I beat him once, and New Game Plus didn't try. Like fuck that. Like I just walked across. But like design wise, he's the coolest, right? Like, but it does that same like purple laser beam that erupts into flames. And it just it looks so fucking. It's just one of my favorite like. Special effects to see is like lasers with like fire bursting from them. It looks amazing. And then like,
and when he shoots them out of his spikes too, out of his fins, yeah.
Well, that's the thing is like one laser beam is terrifying enough, but then they try to drop more bombs on him, and he clenches in, and like his entire back just erupts with lasers, and it's like a Pink Floyd show. It just fucking fills the sky.
Yeah, and just like cuts all the bombers to pieces. It's like, oh, there's something way above me that I can't reach. Psych.
Mm-hmm.
And then his tail starts shooting the laser too.
Oh
yeah, they saved that reveal for later, but that was fucking cool too. He's just got a laser on a laser at both ends.
Mm-hmm. Hey man, that's me after Taco Bell. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
And that's the thing I love the most about these modern renditions of Godzilla. With the 2013 one, I think it also does it well, but in a different way, is when a director understands Godzilla, they understand that the atomic breath scene needs to take your breath away. Like, you can't just have Godzilla in the beginning of the film use the atomic breath and, be like, oh yeah, cool, look at its, ability, like Thanos, using the reality stone. It's like, no, it needs to be a center focus piece. There needs to be that slow build up, that charge up, and then, this spectacular light show.
Well, and that it taps him out too, right? Like in this movie, like after that scene, he just like goes into a period of dormancy for like 2 or 3 weeks or something like that, right? Just like frozen still in the middle of Tokyo, because like as they say multiple times, he's like powered by nuclear fission. So there's literally a nuclear reactor inside of him, and he's like tapped it out and has to like go into a period of dormancy to prevent his own body from like going into a meltdown. So it's like the atomic breath is devastating, but it's not something that he can just like continually use. Right? Like he is it, and that's how it should be. It should feel like something that, like you said, Spence, it takes your breath away. That is something that it's a climactic moment. Overuse of it makes it common, right?
Well, and at the risk of sounding like a moron, like we have a clear understanding of his power levels.
Yeah, they're over 9,000, I would say.
Way over, yeah.
One of my favorite parts about this film is these action scenes where, first of all, a lot of the music in the film is direct music from the 54.
Yes.
Remixed. When we have the scenes where they're using like the plan Orochi, the Gucci plan to put him to sleep, send him to the dentist.
Yep.
They're playing these self-defense force Japanese army theme over just these trains kind of rolling through the city, and before that we get that same music as they're showing like people in a factory making a blood coagulant, and it kind of puts, the heroes as, not your military men and, a big thing America does where it's like, oh, action, cool guys, the U.S. military, hoorah, let's go. But here's, these everyday men and women and bureaucrats who are getting, like, the epic music scene as they're, like, filing paper.
Yeah, a lot of very exciting moments of people rapidly typing on laptops and walking down halls, It is exciting though. I joke, but like it is a legitimately like exciting film. Very dense, very quickly paced. I cannot say that I was able to reliably track any characters other than our protagonist for the most part, Yaguchi, and then the Japanese American diplomat girl.
Oh yeah,
the senator's daughter.
Yeah, we gotta talk about what'd you say, Spence?
Her like English where it's like, you help me, okay.
Okay. Yeah. So she is supposed to be an American. She's the.
I think is what you said.
Yeah.
Yeah,
she's a
senator's daughter.
She's a senator's daughter, but because of her, shared Japanese-American heritage, she's a natural choice for a sort of like diplomatic liaison between the U.S. and Japan. So she's supposed to be an American character. Like you can, obviously, like I'm not a Japanese speaker by any means, but like you can tell when she shows up, like even when she's speaking Japanese, that she's doing like some kind of accent. I guess that's what Japanese spoken in an American accent is supposed to sound like. But then she speaks English, and you realize, oh, this actress is absolutely a native Japanese speaker, but does not speak English at all.
And
because
kind of phonetically. And I personally I find it to be very entertaining. And two,
it's funny. It's funny for sure.
Past it like narratively, because that actress, well, like her English is not like her English like pronunciation to like sound like a native like someone actually like who grew up in America is not on point, I love her charisma. She's so sharp and full of energy and fun, and I always get excited.
Well, yeah,
when
she's
she comes on screen.
Like I said, she's one of two characters I could keep track of in a movie that is chock full of so many characters. They have to introduce you to them with on-screen name and title, and I still don't remember most of them. But yeah, she's good. She's a lot of fun. It is really funny as Americans to have them present this character as, oh yeah, she's a born and bred American, and hear her speak English, and just she clearly is not.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like, the writing and characterization for her is great, but it's just the delivery of the English lines.
Yeah,
come across.
There's even like one bit where they're like they've built their science room up for the first time, and she comes in, and like it's just, we didn't even see her face say it, but just off screen she goes, yes, like that. It's really funny.
Yeah, and you know what? I can't even be too hard on this actress, because apparently when she accepted the role, she did not even realize like how much the character was supposed to speak English until she like got the script and started rehearsing, and she did not speak English at all. So they had to hire her. I think I read that they hired some YouTuber to come in and be like her dialect coach.
That explains so much.
And I feel like for somebody who obviously like had never spoken, like did not speak English and did not know English, to like come in and have to like phonetically try to pronounce English without really knowing what you're saying, I think she did a commendable job.
Yep.
I won't say passable, because it's not, but
entertaining regardless.
Sure. Yeah. And honestly, it's like
I could do the other way around.
It's like it's a Japanese-made film, first and foremost for Japanese audiences. Like, can most of them tell? Probably not. So who fucking cares, right? Like, I would not be able to discern if a character in a movie speaking Russian was doing a passable job of speaking Russian, right? Who cares?
Also, it doesn't help that like the dialogue is clearly written by someone fluently speaks Japanese, but does not fluently speak American because English. This is America, but like there's a moment where she meets with her dad also, and we never see the dad's face. They do like the whole like Dr. Claw thing where he's all, you know, like it doesn't matter who he is, and like you don't have to think about like all the technicalities of it, and we just hear the
Well, it's
American
because he was a Japanese actor, and they got an American a native English speaker to do ADR over it.
Exactly.
Literally, aside from her, all of the other characters who speak other languages throughout the movie are always shot either from behind or from a far distance. For that reason,
or neck below,
or neck below. Yeah.
Even still, like the lines themselves, like they got an American actor to say the lines for the senator himself, but the lines themselves are still like clearly like there's like that translation element. Like one of the last things he says to her is like, well, if you want to become the president, you're gonna have to worry about this, otherwise mud will stick. And it's like, well, that's a Japanese colloquialism, like clearly. Like that's like but I think that's fun. Like I once again, that's the kind of thing that I enjoy in a movie, if anything. So it's good.
It's charming.
You said that like you only really remember two of the characters. There's actually a couple I wanted to touch on that I like a lot. So when Godzilla does his nuclear breath, he kills the Prime Minister and a bunch of other people. I like the Prime Minister because he showed like someone who clearly like got the job for a reason, but like couldn't necessarily make all the right decisions in the right amount of time. And
he's not doing a very good job in this movie.
Looked the part of a prime minister, and he spoke with the voice of a prime minister, but he had the uncertainty of a civilian. And like you can see the surprise on his face when they say, "Yo, these attack copters are coming in. They want to shoot at Godzilla, but they're civilians. What do we do?" And he goes, "Oh no!" And it's like everyone's always gathered around him. The camera gets very claustrophobic when it's from his perspective, as he's clearly like just overwhelmed. Like there's just so many people giving him all this advice, and there's contradicting information flying around, and he doesn't know what to do. And I love that. I think it's really good. And we don't even see, like, We don't even get like a close-up shot of him inside the helicopter when it's hit. It's in the distance. They're like, "Oh, the Prime Minister's taking off," and boom, he's gone. Just a purple laser just whips right through the helicopter, and he's exploded forever. He's gone. And I like that. I like that it feels sort of impersonal because it happens impersonally. Again, Godzilla is a force of nature, and I think like other directors probably would have had like a shot of him inside of the copter as he's like, you know, like Last Crusade, like just melted alive or something silly. And I like that we don't get that. It's a mid shot of the helicopter. It's gone. He's gone. We're moving on. But the man who takes up his role is like the lead of the Agricultural Commission or something. Like, just happened to be like at the point of like highest seniority. And they talk about him off screen a little bit, and we cut to him, and I love how they set him up. They're like, "All right, sir, you know, here's your soba," and they bring in like his bowl of like ramen or whatever, and he looks at it and goes, "Oh, the noodles are soggy." Like, it just shows like, oh no, we've got like an incompetent old geezer at the reins now. Like, we've almost gotten from like a guy who like can kind of do it, but he's unsure, to like just a complete nincompoop. Like, this guy's not going to get anything done, and it's great because it leaves a vacuum for our protagonist to take the reins politically. I love all that stuff.
For me,
We never get to see him, but I really love the characterization they do for Goromaki, the original scientist who was studying Godzilla.
Yes.
oh yeah,
And
yeah.
Great point.
This idea, you know, that they bring up, his wife had suffered from, you know, radiation poison, and she had passed away because of it. And he resented really anyone who worked in radiation. That's why he had left, like, the DOE. And, you know, when he left that final message to the heroes, you know, it's do with this as you will. You know, as much as he hates the idea of radiation, you know, and to get into the plot, one of the things he finds out is that Godzilla is creating new isotopes, and one of the things they bring up is that this isotope has a half-life of 30 days, which in the realm of, you know, radioactive material is absolutely nuts.
Yeah, brief.
Yeah, if we could have something that had a half-life of 30 days, like there'd be no nuclear waste issue at all. And, you know, this could completely revolutionize the world, but I feel like, you know, part of his hatred for it kind of, you know, stops him from kind of publishing this, and he just wants to see, you know, well, what will humanity do with this information?
Yeah, he's a really interesting character. Well, non-character, I guess. He leaves a lot of interesting clues, but he's like totally absent from the film at all.
I like that. I like the mystery of it.
Yeah, no, I think it's cool. He's the one who like predicted Godzilla years ahead of time. Wasn't he?
Yeah,
He'd been living like the U.S., right? And that was part of the reason that like the U.S. was so determined to like help Japan get this shit under control fast, to like mitigate them of responsibility, because like he had been living there when he was doing all this research.
And also, Godzilla fed on nuclear waste from the U.S. originally, right? Like, isn't that where like it was like a nuclear dumping site?
No, it was one of Japan's sites.
It was one of Japan's. Oh, okay.
I'm pretty sure, yeah.
I really love the really elaborate diagram that's left that they couldn't make heads or tails of until they fold it.
Well, they realized that
into
he left a
origami.
paper crane. He left a paper crane on the table, and they realized it was a clue, and that you have to fold the diagram like origami. So you go to these scientists with these like big elaborate charts, like folding them in like all these elaborate ways, and it's really fun. It's
Godzilla's
silly,
genome is so complex that it can only be understood if you fold the paper into like a certain type of shape or something, and that allows them to crack the case to be able to like create the blood coagulant or whatever that they use to freeze him.
Yeah, you can't think about it in just an X and Y dimension. You have to incorporate Z. It's so silly. Like, I love it. No,
well, it's cool. I mean, I feel like it definitely helps contribute to the idea that like Godzilla is something that is like alien, you know, like it's the most advanced evolutionary like life form on the planet, right?
Well, speaking of that, and its advancements and how it evolves, Spence, can you drop the coolest shit?
Yeah, I put it in the recording channel, but so I don't know if you guys saw this, if any of you are looking up, but so there was actually a whole part of the film that was cut out, and that the teaser at the end of the movie is actually part of. We get this close up of, well, and first of all, I just want to mention there's a shot before, when we have our final dialogue with Yaguchi and the US character, where they're on this building, and in the background is just, Godzilla's corpse after it's been solidified, and it's just this statue, in the middle of Tokyo. And when they zoom in on it, we have this image that goes up from like the base of the tail, and you get to the top of the tail, and you see these weird humanoid creatures kind of like spewing off from the tail as like pieces of him fall apart. And what was supposed to happen was there was supposed to be two additional forms. One where actual Shin Godzilla becomes a humanoid form very much reminiscent of the angels from Evangelion, and a sixth form, which this is how he would propagate, and what those are in his tail is those are the corpses of the people in the buildings that he smashed, that he's assimilating their DNA and kind of overriding it, and they were going to like kind of propagate from his tail and like bring corpses and humans to him in order to like fully saturate and reproduce.
So fucking awesome.
Turning Godzilla into like true Lovecraftian horror. Yeah, I had heard some of that stuff. I'd also heard that like a very early draft of the script had him like continuing to grow and evolve and become larger until eventually he got so large that he consumes the universe.
Yeah.
Which
cool.
like
that's just Gurren Lagann at that point. Like that's
man, I don't know. I feel like that would have been a kind of fucking baller way to end the movie, that Godzilla gets so
like,
big that he
like
assimilates the universe.
Yeah, like Katamari, Tamasi, he just
Yeah.
around and takes everything into. But yeah, no, I fucking love this. Like that he like slowly like incorporates people into him and like other matter as he evolves and grows and becomes this strange life form. And man, the concept art for like the alien form is fucking terrifying too. Like, doll face. Like I love it. But I will say, I'd love to see that in a sequel. But I really like that we cut right after seeing, like, we cut to credits right after seeing that shot of his tail with the people, like, some sort of people form was starting to come off of it. It leaves so much
like
imagination. It's really terrifying.
Just narrowly avoided something like really horrible by freezing him when they did. And like, of course, did they like actually kill him? Or is he in a state of dormancy? Like, will he wake up again someday? I love that ambiguity. I will say, the odds of us getting a sequel to this anytime soon seem pretty much nil, because I learned today that part of the deal that Toho made with giving the rights to Godzilla to Legendary to make these movies is that they're not allowed to make any further live action Godzilla movies while any of the Legendary MonsterVerse movies are still in production, like while they're still making those movies.
Oh.
Okay. So interesting enough, that deal actually somewhat changed around the time of Godzilla vs. Kong, whenever it was coming out. They don't want the films in post-production to overlap. So they're allowed to make domestic films, but whenever they're in the marketing phase of either a Legendary Verse or a Toho film, they can't start production on another film.
Okay.
So it's a leapfrog thing.
Yeah,
That's
it's
that's a little less strict and I'm more agreeable, I think. Because I was gonna say, like, if the original deal still stood, I was gonna be pissed because, like, as a hater of most of these Legendary movies, like, are they keeping me from more Shin Godzilla? Because if so, fuck that.
But I do
No,
also
honestly,
have.
that sounds like a smart strategy because you don't want like
Yeah, you don't
right in the U.S. Like you don't want to cannibalize those sales, right? You
you don't
need
want them to
competing with
compete
your
with
own
each
IP.
other. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. That seems fine. Yeah.
I do
Like-
have bad news though.
Oh no.
One, which is that Anno is notoriously not very easy to work with, and I won't say there's bad blood, but there was definitely a lot of kind of we didn't really enjoy working with him on Toho's side, and Anno didn't really enjoy working with Toho on his side. To the point that coming back for exactly a Shin Godzilla 2 doesn't seem likely. But there was actually an announcement, which is that a new domestic Godzilla film is coming out actually this year, November 3rd.
What?
Wow.
Yep.
Is there a trailer
And
for that?
there is just a teaser. But
Interesting.
we have the director, who is Takayashi Yamazaki. And I don't know if you guys know anything about him. He was the director of Lupin the Third, the First,
No
as
shit.
well as the Parasite movies and the Dragon Quest Your Story movie.
Wow.
I've seen
and
none of that, but
Yeah, and in terms of Godzilla,
I know those words.
there was actually a ride for the Universal theme park in Japan that he did a very short kind of like intro sequence for.
Oh, interesting.
Is it good?
It is very much kind of base Godzilla, which is where a lot of this is kind of seeming to take place. A lot of just what we know about the film is that it's going to start in World War II era Japan and then kind of go through history, so almost like another reboot, kind of.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's an interesting approach going over that much of a time span. Because that's one of the things I really like about this movie is that it's essentially within the span of like what a week or two.
Yeah, it's like
Um,
2 or 3 weeks.
yeah, I think several weeks because I do think they're at one point they're like Godzilla. He's predicted to come out of his dormancy in about 15 days or something like that.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not like so. I think that it does take place over the course of several weeks. I don't know exactly how long it is between when he goes back into the ocean to like cool off and when he comes back, but yeah, a relatively short period of time.
Like a month and a half.
I think it was 2 weeks from when Kamada-kun came on to when he
Okay.
comes back.
Yeah,
And then there
so
were the additional 2 weeks after the laser scene.
so we're looking at like between 1 and 2 months for the
Yeah.
course of the story. Yeah, I mean, hey, Godzilla Through the Ages could be fun.
Like I said, just another flavor of Big Lizard. As long as it's well cooked, I'm happy.
One more thing before we wrap up, that I want to dip our toes into. We don't have to get too into it because I don't know if any of us are really qualified for it. But I do know that like from certain people like in Japan, this movie has gotten some sort of criticism of being like pretty nationalistic and like right wing. Like I'm certainly not enough of an expert on Japanese politics to say like for sure. I think there are some pretty heavy-handed like nationalistic overtones, especially in the back half, but I'm just curious if like how you guys interpret any of that.
I personally took it at face value. I think one of the scenes that stands out in particular is like quote like nationalistic is when the protagonist is giving his speech to all the soldiers like who are gonna have to go into this irradiated zone and man these trucks to like inject the fluid into pump the
You
fluid.
you you might die, but you're giving your lives for the glory of Japan, so on
Japan
and
is
so
strongest
forth.
in the field, like,
Yeah.
and all of those lines, like big nationalism, but also like that's what you say to soldiers going into a battle. Like that's what you do. Like and so like I think at face value, like that's how it would go in the moment. And also like for a movie that would be like considered to be like super nationalistic, it's pretty fucking critical of the government. Like and you know, like, nationalistic things can be like go down with bureaucracy, you know, in with like you know like
Well,
you know,
it's
a
critical of
military
the
government. Like
it's
but
critical of the current government, but it
yeah.
it certainly offers like our two main protagonists as like you know sort of like hope for a better tomorrow, right? And I think
Of course,
that I do think that Yaguchi as a character is pretty nationalistic. And you know, like both he and the American woman, uh, oh, that's right, her name is Kayoko Ann Patterson. Um, she obviously does what she does for political like means as well, right? Like she wants to be president. You know, she wants to be president of the United States. So I don't know. Again, like I don't feel like I'm well versed enough in Japanese politics to say for sure, but I do think that like you know they're a big part of the second act. It's like well we've got to figure out this contingency to like fill Godzilla with this blood coagulant to freeze him, right? Because the alternative is that America is going to drop a nuke on him. And are we really going to let America drop a nuke on Japan again? Like, are we going to let this happen again? And, you know, I think that is something that I can certainly sympathize with that feeling. Is like, are we really going to let this foreign power nuke us over and over, right?
And
Even if
like
it's
with us asking them to, which is like the most humiliating and like terrifying aspect of it.
right.
Is it's like
Yeah.
you know we need the U.S.'s help in this, but asking the U.S. to help us means asking again, and like that's pretty wretched. Like
So from like an from I can get down with it from like an anti-US, anti-imperialist kind of perspective. Beyond that, I don't feel like educated enough to say much more about the film's politics, but it is very much like for the glory of the great nation of Japan, you know.
So it's interesting. You know, I mentioned to one of my good friends, his name is Far. You know, we're both really big Godzilla fans. I mentioned I was coming on this podcast, and going back through Shin Godzilla, you know, I kind of was looking at the reaction, and I disagree with a lot of the initial thought, which was that Anno made this really weird kind of like anti-America, like let's go Japan film. Because although there is a lot in the film that speaks out against, you know, the kind of vassal stating of Japan and, you know, America pushing its way into its politics, there actually is a very interesting scene where when they start talking about the UN Council, that, once, Kyoko mentions that, you know, there's this Yaguchi plan, the US and France actually want to call off the nuclear strike until after this. And it's actually China and Russia that are like, hey, if you don't do it, we're going to do it. Which kind of forces the US's hands because they're kind of seen, like, you know, globally as like the handler of Japan, that like they would have to nuke them. And another, you know, scene is whenever we go to America and they have President Ross, you know, famous President Ross. I love him. He was the 46th president, something like that. You know, one of the senators mentions, you know, that like 2 weeks seems a lot for us in the global world, but to, you know, ask Japan to evacuate all their citizens in 2 weeks is like barely enough time. And
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, the idea I kind of get from the film, and another thing that's kind of pulled is Yaguchi actually makes a statement against kind of Japan imperialism and like nationalism, where he mentions that this idea of seeing Japan as great and the arbiter of all causes without needing help is what led to the death of 3 million Japanese people during World War II.
That is,
You
yeah,
know,
that's an excellent point. That
and
is a really great moment too, I
he's
think.
very blatantly, calling out the Toho Empire, and saying like, hey, there's all this stuff here. But I think it really paints more a picture in terms of the Japanese politics of, you know, to not accept the status quo of not only, geopolitical, but the inner politics that really led to the disaster of the Fukushima response, which was government bodies being like, oh well, I can't do anything until we have this meeting, or this is unprecedented, so we're going to need to pass a bill before I can even discuss this or do this. And it kind of paints this picture of, as a Japanese person, if you see a way to improve the country and to better it, you know it's wrong to sit idly by. We need to, step up and kind of take the first plunge.
Interesting perspective. I'm glad you brought that to the table. Because I feel like I had sort of glossed over a couple of those moments in the movie too, just because of like how much is going on
Yeah.
and yeah, and like how many characters there are, and like just how often it's like jumping to new things. So I
Yeah,
definitely
no,
appreciate that.
there's a lot, and just another scene is that small scene we have where they go to Japan to ask them to use their supercomputers, as Cleveland said it when we were watching it. The Fortnite hosting servers.
Epic Fortnite servers.
Oh, the when they go to Germany.
Yeah, and the person who brings it up, and he's like, "We're not going to open our systems. These are all proprietary secrets." And the lady is like, "Where's your empathy for your fellow man?"
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like she tells him like we'd be glad to do it. It's like, of course we're gonna help you with your big radioactive lizard problem. Why wouldn't we?
Right. I want to just briefly, before we wrap up, I do want to briefly touch on taking Godzilla to the dentist,
Oh,
if we could. So the final sequence, we've talked about what they do. We haven't talked about how. They launch like an all-out attack on Godzilla. First off, they by destroying buildings around him, so they collectively domino like onto him. I love that. That's really fun, with the strategy of like them hitting the building with a missile at one angle, and then like several other smaller missiles, so it falls like perfectly onto Godzilla from all angles. And
they pack the trains full of explosives and launch them off the tracks at him.
yeah, which I think is one of the silliest moments in the movie, like when they hit him with like the all-force like non-piloted trains, and he gets hit by like, I don't know, 10 trains at once, and they all like spaghetti up around him and explode, and
It's awesome.
It's great, it's rad, it's silly, and I like it. But anyway, like so, they knock Godzilla over, and then they bring in the crane trucks, and it's a whole platoon of trucks that then like proceed to extend out all the arms and just pour the. We never see the fluid, like the cranes just go deep into his mouth, and they're just like pumping that in there, and they just like pump all like the glue, the Elmer's glue into his mouth, to turn him into a statue, and he wakes up, and they'd have to do it twice. He wakes up, destroys all the cranes, and then they knock him over at the next location. And
apparently, that was all a direct reference to the Fukushima disaster, because they used those same kind of cement trucks to try to cool off the meltdown as it was happening. So that's something that that Japanese people, that's an image that Japanese people would recognize, as all of these trucks gathered around like trying to pump like cooling fluid, in this case into the mouth of a big radioactive lizard.
yeah.
And it really does look like he's at the dentist when he just has like
yeah,
all
just
these,
like lying down just with his mouth open. They're just like all these little straws, just like dumping shit into his mouth, and it works, and they did it, and they saved the day.
Good job.
Hooray! We've been going long, so we should wrap up. So,
Cleve, this was your pick for a movie. Why don't you start with the rating?
yes.
Yeah. Well, we brought up some light criticisms of this movie, but I think they're all things that brought me joy. Like, even the quote, like, flaws with this film are things that I like. So, my personal rating, I'm giving it a fucking 5. Like, this is, I think, my new favorite Godzilla movie. I watched it with you guys, Tease and Ben, and the next night I watched it a second time with Spence, and I had just as much fun watching it a second time. There's a lot to take in with this movie, so it's great for multiple rewatches, and also, like, I mean, I could just watch that laser sequence over and fucking over. Easy 5 for me.
Ben?
Yeah, I really like this movie. It's one of my favorite Godzilla movies. Like I said before, I feel like it drags a little bit in the middle, but it's really compelling overall, and I love the design of Godzilla and the way it's shot. And that whole ending third act sequence is so good, man. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. Definitely recommend it.
Yeah, I'm gonna ditto Ben. For me, this is kind of, and I've seen a relatively few number of Godzilla films, but for me, I feel like this is the platonic ideal of a Godzilla film. Is a little long. There's a lot of characters. It's very dense. It can be hard to track everything that's going on, but it's got like the coolest depiction of Godzilla I've ever seen. Some really great ideas. Some really like good aspects of horror too, which is what we love on this podcast. So I'm going to give it a strong 4 out of 5 as well. Spence, last but not least, what would you rate Shin Godzilla out of 5?
I think I have to echo Cleveland. Just to give guys some preference, this is the first time for your viewers have ever been on here. I tend to rate movies pretty high, especially when they involve childhood heroes of mine. And things I love. But honestly, for all the faults that I can find in Godzilla, and Shin Godzilla, sorry, I think it perfectly encapsulates what a Godzilla film is, and this shoots up to the top 5 Godzilla list, in my opinion, of all the films. So I have to give it a 5 out of 5.
Hell yeah. Well, between the 4 of us, that will give Shin Godzilla a very strong average of 4.5 out of 5. Check that shit out if you haven't seen it. Next week, Ben, it's your pick next week, right?
Yeah, next week it is my pick, and we're gonna dive back into the Argento well.
Yes.
I want to cover Opera by Dario Argento.
My favorite Argento.
My favorite Argento as well, and one of my favorite horror movies in general. I'm super excited to talk about it. For our listeners, it's on Shudder and Tubi, if you are interested. So yeah, I'm super excited.
Hell yeah. I'm also very excited.
I can further my Giallo education. Great.
Yep.
We do have some results on Ennisman.
Yes, from last week. Let's do this quick.
Yes. So Rotten Tomatoes, I predicted 82, TCU predicted 78, and Cleveview predicted 50. Right now it's sitting at 78. Tease hit it right on the money.
Wow.
Hell yeah.
You, dude. Nice.
So for opening weekend, I predicted 2 million, TC predicted 5 mil, and Cleveview predicted 800,000. As we all know, it got a very limited release.
Yeah.
So opening weekend, it did 79,000.
Holy shit.
So
even Cleveland was way off. Just the least way off.
But I got it.
Yep.
You got it.
And then for collective rating, I predicted 4, and Tease and Cleve, you both predicted 4.5. So I win that one just by lowballing.
Yeah.
So we each get 1 point.
Hell yeah.
Well done. Do we have any quotes for that one?
Let's see. I said, what if we make the Wicker Man again? TC said, oh shit, they went and made the Wicker Man again. And Cleve, you said wanky but good.
Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah,
I guess, kinda.
No, I think that's it. I think it's a wanky movie.
I think my additional comment here kind of encapsulated it pretty well. I said, the film will impress visually, but leave us a bit flat on the story side.
Oh no, definitely, yeah.
Yeah, there you nailed it.
For sure.
Well, because we're all recording remotely, we're not gonna do a sponsor this week. We're just
brought
gonna.
to you by Crinkus McDinkus. Get your Crinkus McDinkus at the Binkus, and there you go. That's the sponsor.
All right, cool. All right, so that'll do it for us this week. If you like the show, don't forget to leave us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. You can also support us at Patreon, patreon.com/podpeoplepod. Shout out to our honorary pod boys, Sam, Zach, and Micah. We thank and appreciate them as always. You can follow us at Twitter at podpeoplepod and at letterboxd.com/podpeoplepod, where you'll find a list of all the films we've talked about on the show with our average ratings and links to those reviews. I'm on Twitter at SomeSpookySnake and streaming at twitch.tv/SomeSpookySnake.
Yeah, for my recommendation corner for the week, go check out not Breath of the Wild, but also Breath of the Wild.
Yeah.
Check out Tears of the Kingdom, the new Legend of Zelda game.
Damn, what a pick.
Yeah, what a niche recommendation there.
I know. I was thinking about giving a more obscure recommendation, but I looked at myself and I realized you've played 45 hours of of Tears of the Kingdom in the past week. You should not recommend anything besides that.
Yeah, well, I can second that. I've also been playing a lot of it.
Oh, yeah. Shout out to the little indie company Nintendo that could really use the support.
Yeah.
And my this week, my shout out, of course, usually to DreadXP. Go wishlist MFN. It's on the way. Oh, and Hannah Doom is out. Go be a spooky silly wizard. In our little spooky silly wizard game. I did like all of the character portraits. Ben, Teese, and Spence all modeled as wizard portraits, so you can see their weird, goofy faces in games. I put robes on them and beards and silly eyes. Oh, also, Spence's cat Mooner is in the game as well. As an adorable cat wizard. That's it from me. Spence, you have any shoutouts?
Yeah, if anyone's interested, you can follow my ramblings about all things, Japanese, and also just a bunch of other stuff at my Twitter. It's at Dragon Spence. Very weird spelling of Spence. It's S-P-E-N-C. Don't blame me. I was 11 years old. Didn't know there was an E at the end. But
Thank.
I just want to give a recommendation to the Netflix anime Godzilla 0 Point, I think is it. I think it's a really good Godzilla, especially if you are really hard in the sci-fi. It's only 10 episodes long, but each episode feels like a college level course in quantum mechanics, so it goes real hard.
Spence, thanks so much for joining us, man. It was a delight. Really glad to bring your perspective to this really awesome movie. So thank you.
And if you guys ever do the other Shins or anything else, I'm always willing to come back.
We'll have you back for sure, no doubt. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Much like Godzilla, we are going to retreat back into the ocean to cool down and slumber until next we emerge. Good night.
知らない